Welcome back, CSC 103, Fall 2020 to Exercise 11, Turtle Squares, FVL. The FVL standing for Function, Variables, and Loops. We have some variables here, and we have a loop, a for loop, which actually is allowing us to run these two lines of code 4 times. And now we're going to make a function so that we can actually draw squares without having to copy and paste all this code. So what we're going to do to make a function, we're going to make a function definition. Now, the same way we did the loop, where we had kind of a header and then it had a colon here and then everything inside it was indented, we're going to do the same thing with our function. And we're going to put all of this stuff in a function. So it's all here. It's like a recipe. We're just putting it in like a little folder. Kind of think of it like that. We're putting in a little folder so we could reuse it. I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but we're going to go here and make a function. So right after this first line, or right before this first line, I'm just going to hit enter. So we could keep this space here, and I'm going to say def. That's how we define a function. I'm going to type def, and you can give the function a name, just like you can a variable. And I'm going to call it draw square, and I'll just put it all together like that. Now, you can have a function name with a space in it or anything like that. You can have an underscore, but you should not have a dash. You should not have a dash when you do it. So whether you want to put an underscore, sometimes people use camel case where they'll use a capital S like that, but you don't see that as much in Python. Python usually see underscores, or you might just have them all together. So I think it's easier just to put it all together. Then you're not worrying about case. It's all lowercase. And the only time we're using underscores is when we need them. So I'm going to call it draw square, and it's showing up in black. If it shows up in purple, it means something else related to Python, but it doesn't, so it's showing up in black. So it's going to say def draw square, and we're going to put parentheses around it. And they can be empty or they can have arguments in there. Now we're going to put arguments in there, but we don't have any yet, but we are. And we also have to put a colon, so we have to put a colon there. Now we have to bump all this stuff over. So instead of going here and hitting tab, 20 times going down or whatever it is, what we can do is just highlight all of this stuff, including the for loop, and just hit your tab key. So I'm highlighting all this and hitting my tab key. And it bumps everything over, including the for loop, because that has to be indented twice. So that's perfect. That's what we want. And there's our def draw square. Now, if we go to run this, nothing happens. That's because this thing, the fact that it's defined as a function, it needs to be called. So it's kind of protected now. So it's not used until it's called upon. That's it's invoked. That's another word they use for function, invocation. So you invoke the function or you call the function. So we're going to call the function. Sometimes I use the term run the function as well, but we kind of run the source file is what we do up here. But we're going to call the function. So let's call it. Let's go down here and I'll show you how to call it. And now I'm going to put an extra space in between. Now, when you call the function, this is another mistake that people make a lot, and you're going to say, oh, it's not working. The function cannot be indented. When you call the function, it should be outside. It's not a part of the definition, so get it out of being indented. So make sure you get it back to the margin. And when you call the function, you just give it a name. You just give it its name, draw square, and it just gets the parentheses like that. And since we don't have any arguments in it right now, you could just leave that empty like that. So you don't say def. So you define it with def, and then when you call it, you just do that. And let's see if it works. And it works. You called the function, and it ran the function. And you could even put this in a loop and run it 3 times or something, and it could call the function 3 times or something if you wanted to. But we're not going to do that right now. So we're calling the function. So the thing we're going to do with a function now, if you ran it twice, I mentioned, the whole idea about this is we could make 2 squares. And I'm going to paste that. Now, if you did this, it's going to do this. It's going to draw it, and it's going to draw it. That's going to do exactly the same thing. So that doesn't really help us because we have to change some things. Rarely are you going to run a function exactly the same way, especially when you're doing something visual, or else they're going to be right on top of each other. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to create arguments for things that are going to be changed. So you just saw this. What's going to be changed? Well, the y is going to be changed to where it starts. So wherever the y is, we can change that. And then also the color. That's another obvious thing we're going to change is the color. As long as we're keeping these the same, but the things that they're going to change about both of them are going to be the color and where it starts, where the y is. So what we can do here is in here we could put parameters in here, and you basically set parameters, and then when you call the function you send in the arguments. So they're the actual values you're putting in. So the parameters are just kind of like placeholders here. So we're going to put a placeholder for, let's say, color. Now I'm just going to put CLR so it doesn't kind of mess up with any other Python term. So I'll just use CLR, and notice it's coming up here in italic, which I guess is okay. And then I'm going to put a comma because we're going to put a second parameter. And for this one, we're going to put in what's going to change. We're going to have one called start Y because it's going to vertically it's going to start differently. So I'm going to call it start Y only because I had another one called start X, and we're going to call this start Y. So we have these two kind of placeholders here. They're almost like variables for the function, except where do we have the values for them? Well, the values are going to be applied down here. Except if we're changing the color, we already have a green color here. So we're going to take this out because this is hard coding the green color. Every time we run the function, it's going to be green. And we don't want to do that. We only want to run the function green when we want it to be green. So I'm going to take this out, and I'm going to just put color. So that's almost like using a variable in here. So the color is going to be variable. And again, when are we going to change the color? Down here. Now let me just do one right now before I do two of these. And for color, I'm going to put in green. So I'm actually putting in the value down here. So I'll make that green. Now we have to put start Y. And again, I could just do it for this one. Now the start Y for this one. Now here's what's, you got to watch this because this is a little confusing because we actually have a start Y here at 0. So I'm going to change this and put start Y. So that means we can now change where this starts because this one only started at 0. But now we can change that by just giving a value down here. So now we're like feeding it in. It's like with this function call, we're saying, okay, make it green and start at whatever. And it's going to feed it in. And then when the function gets run, it's going to plug in whatever it wants here. It's going to say, oh, you want green and you want whatever's here. Now we're going to put in, let's say 0 for now. That should just make it run exactly the way it is. Just to make it different, let me make this purple just so you can see it's a little different instead of being green. So we're going to basically call the function, and it's going to flow these arguments in here. So you have to make sure that we don't have a hard-coded color in here. So color is going to be using that, and where it goes to start is going to be using that. We already have an index that are using variables here, and minus 25 is where it's going to end. I think that's still going to be okay of where it ends, although we might have to put start Y minus 25. So it's minus 25 from where it started. Because here's where it starts at 0, then it's minus 25. So we might have to put start Y in here. But let's just see what happens first before I do that. That's kind of thinking it through. So let's just run it. And there's our purple square. So that's perfect. That looks good. Now if we make a second one, I'm just going to copy this. I'll make a second one. And I'm going to make a second function call. And the second one I'm going to make orange. So I'm just going to change the color here. So we're going to make one that's orange. So we're basically making a copy, except what we're changing is we're making the color orange. And then where the Y is going to be, the start Y, instead of 0, we're going to make it at like minus 150 or something. I think that's where we did it last time. So let's put in minus 150. So we're putting in a number here, but we're putting it on the fly. And it's kind of like on the football field if you send in a play right away. So they don't have the play called in the huddle. Maybe you're calling a variable right on the line of scrimmage and running a play. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're sending it in right here. So I'm going to run it and see what happens. There's one, and the problem is at the end. Notice that the turtle ended up there. That's because we have minus 25. So it's doing the same thing. Even at the second one, it's just going back up there to minus 25. So if we do start Y, if we put start Y here, that means whatever the start Y is, if it's minus 150, it's going to go minus 25 and make it minus 175, just like we did before. And if it's the first one, it's just going to go 0 minus 25, which is minus 25, which will also be correct. If that makes any sense. I don't know if it does or not, but there's the first one and there's the second one. So when it ends up, it's going to end X, which is in the middle, but this is going minus 25 and it's going 0 minus 25. Because remember, we're sending for the first one, if we just ignore the second one, if we just ignore the second one and just think the first one, we're calling this function and we're saying, okay, throw purple in here for the color. So it's going to use purple in here, and we're saying throw 0 in here for the start y. So it's going to go to the start x, which is whatever that length minus 2, length divided by 2 and a negative. And then the start y is going to be 0. So it's going to start at 0, and it's starting right there. Now the second one, what's happening down here when it ends, it's using start y, which is 0, and minus 25, and it's going down to minus 25. And then when we run the second one, we're saying, okay, this time run the same function, but make it orange, and make the start y minus 150, and it's going to go minus 150. And then for the end y, instead of just being minus 25, it's going to be minus 150 minus 25, which is going to be minus 175, which is going to put it down here. And you could even run a third one if you want, but let's see how 2 work. There's the purple, there's the orange. Maybe the first one I want to make blue, so I'll just throw in blue and see how that works. Maybe the first one I want to start up a little higher. Instead of starting at 0, maybe I'll start it at 50. I'll make it start up a little higher. And now that'll go up a little higher, and that'll go down a little more. And the nice thing about adjusting those, if you wanted to put like 3 of them or something, you could probably put 3 in a row here and make them adjust. But right now, just 2 is fine, and that's all you really need to do. So that will kind of show what we're doing with our function. So again, just to review the function, we have a function definition. We give it a name here, and it's called draw square. And it has, eventually, we put in 2 arguments because we had to. Because if you want the function to change, we have to change some things here. We can't have it exactly the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to send in arguments when we call the function. So here's the function call, and we're just sending in 2 arguments because there are 2 things that are going to change. They're going to change the color, and they're going to change where they start on the y. So I'll put this back at 0. And look at this. We only have 20 some lines of code here compared to if we had to copy and paste everything. This would be going down to 40, 50 lines of code if we had to do this just doing it manually. But by making a function and making a for loop in here, we're really starting to be a lot more efficient and reusing some of this stuff and making it change. So if you say, oh, well, I want a smaller square, I could go in here and make it 80, and that's not a big deal. I could go there and make it 80. Now the y distance are still going to be the same right now, but look at that. Now we made a smaller square. So we can change variables here, and we can even change them here. So these arguments are kind of like variables. They're like variables on the fly. These are kind of, this is the play you're calling, and this is kind of like you're changing the play at the line of scrimmage when you do this, because the play is just about to run and you're throwing something in there to make it a little bit different. So that's kind of the way that works if you get that football analogy. But really we're trying to just be efficient here, so that's why we're making a function variable loop. If you're really not following everything that we're doing here, one thing to remember is just a function is kind of like a recipe that you could run a number of times that you have to call. Function definition, function call, it's just more efficient way of doing it. It's just gathering all these commands up and putting them in one place so you could kind of redo it. And then variables, we know what variables are. They're basically just words that stand for something else. They could stand for other words, they could stand for numbers, and it's easier to kind of change these up here than have to go through all the code. And then finally the loop is just this for loop. It's just this line here where the indented code gets run that many times. It's in this range. Now there's different kinds of loops, but this is one that'll run a number of times. So that's our exercise 11, and we're going to do more with turtles and make different shapes and do random numbers and all kinds of neat stuff. I know this is kind of boring, but it's getting us used to the code. And when you're done with this one, all that you have to do is highlight this and copy it. Then in My Warren, go to coursework for your class and scroll down. This will be unit 10. And you're just going to click on here, and you're just going to add a comment. You know the routine. Insert a link, paste your link, make sure that's the one you were working on, and change this to new window, and hit OK, hit save, and you're done with exercise 11. So we'll be doing a little bit more with turtles, and they'll be getting a little more fun as we work with them.